Hello there, welcome back. Well, a day doesn't go by in which we don't talk about migration. There's more illegal immigrants now, so far this year, than all of 2023, and as a result, more asylum hotels are having to be built. As it transpires, whole families are now crossing the channel, which may be why migrants have died and 3 others, including 3 young children, have been hospitalised after overcrowded boats sink in the English Channel. It's been the 56th fatality this year. Now, it's obvious to me why you're now getting entire families, because you make a lot more money, no doubt, from having an entire family come across. And so the model that the people traffickers use is just lining their pockets. And when people suddenly think this is a great way, I've got my whole family here, I want to go to Britain, I'll get a house, I will get benefits, I will have security, and you're coming from hardship, then why wouldn't you? Why would you send just the young man, the oldest born son or something, if you think the whole lot can go over? But one thing I think is important to stress, and I said this before and I'll say it again, one of the other reasons very often you see just young men coming over in those boats is because these people are just, get beamed down from space and end up in these boats in Calais. They have crossed many countries beforehand. Let's say if you're coming from sub-Saharan Africa, the route you've probably taken is up through sub-Saharan Africa, countries like, let's say you're coming from, I don't know, Ghana, a country where, frankly, you don't need to leave. I used to live in Ghana, perfectly safe there. But you'll have probably gone up through the north of the country, through Burkina Faso, Mali. You would have probably changed hands to another set of people traffickers there, where you're then transported through the desert. You end up in Libya, which is an absolute mess of a country, with warring clans and tribes and warlords all sort of, jostling for control. And so people trafficking and criminality in general arrive there. Then from Libya, you will have paid somebody else, and you'll be waiting around in Libya actually for a very long time before you get the opportunity to pay somebody else to then get on a boat to then go to somewhere in the Mediterranean. And then once you're in the Mediterranean, you're in the hands of yet another people trafficker, and they might be able to give you transit to wherever. You may cross from Italy and languish there for a while until somebody else picks you up, and you pay that person to then get from Italy into, say, France. And then when you're in France, you're paying somebody else again to get into the boats. Now, during this long sequence of being trafficked from pillar to post, from criminal to criminal, various people along the way get plucked off. And they get plucked off for some pretty disgusting, stomach-churning, tragic, heartbreaking, horrible, inhumane things. Young teenagers, very often, might be taken out of that system. Some will be taken to become child soldiers, be forcibly recruited into fighting for grim militias that are waging coups against governments. Some might be taken for their organs to be harvested. If you happen to be a young woman, you might be condemned to domestic slavery, which would probably be a better outcome than being taken for prostitution and becoming a sex slave. Pretty disgusting and vile things happen during the course of people getting all the way to Calais to then get into a boat, which for me is ever more reason why there needs to be bold action to just stop it. Smashing the gangs, frankly, is fanciful. I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but actually it's very hard to police other jurisdictions, especially when those jurisdictions have a whole chain that goes throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And a lot of these gangs are actually Kurdish-controlled by and large. There's a lot of Kurds involved in this trade who don't really have a fixed home. You can't, apart from Kurdistan in northern Iraq, it's very hard to phone up the Kurds and say, can you help us, please? So it's, and same with the Taliban, Hezbollah, a lot of terrorist organizations, the Wagner mercenaries. These are the sorts of people who have a hand in profiteering from this vile trade. And so it's very important, I think, that people realise that it's not worth setting off on that journey in the first place. And a great way of doing that, frankly, I think, would just be to say, you can't come in. We're going to have to turn around a boat. We're going to build a massive detention centre up in the Orkney Islands or wherever it may be.
There's just sort of talking about the nature of organised crime and why it's very difficult to sort of apprehend, and why actually in some cases it's tolerated by many governments around the world. There's a really interesting article that was written in a publication called Palladium magazine about a year or two ago, which I will link on my my Twitter, anybody who wants to read it, but it goes into depth about the role that organised criminals play within most societies. And I think we're very people can be very blind to the way in which actually organised crime interacts with legitimate state power, police, all these sorts of things perform certain functions, especially in areas where, as you're talking about, there's perhaps not quite the same amount of security. Kurdistan being a very good example of that.
Instability, corruption as well.
The symbiosis between organised crime, between terrorist organisations, which may be considered terrorists, or freedom fighters, depending on which government it is that you're talking about, and the use that different governments actually have for those organisations and for the trades in general. It's fascinating. I will link it. But as you say, if you wanted to stop this sort of thing, it would take a coherent, joined-up effort by multiple governments, putting huge amounts of resources, and it would actually mean effectively a military-style operation. The best examples you can think of: Colombia, obviously in the 80s, and Italy in the 70s to the 80s, the years of lead and all that sort of thing. And even then, they weren't able to do it, but they had to effectively wage a war and re-augment entire parts of the system and the justice departments to fighting those people. And all it did was end up offshoring those things, because if other countries don't do it at the same time,
it's like whack-a-mole. It'll carry on popping up. Like, listen, we're going to take a break now, but don't go anywhere, because there's so much more that Benedict and I are going to discuss. Who knows what it's going to be, so tune back in to find out.